Thank you, General. I had two questions. One, we've heard this. I'd like to know how that potentially affects fighting and how you anticipate that could affect the shaping of Mosul after its presumed liberation. And secondly, you mentioned earlier that you don't like timelines, but we know that the Iraqis had a timeline for Mosul. I'm not asking you for where they are in that timeline in terms of the end date, but it seems that they are slower than they had anticipated in terms of this part of the campaign. Is that a fair characterization? Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Again, you cut out at the end, so I think I got the second question, but if I didn't, I'm sure you'll come back to me. So on the station in Mosul, in Tal Afar, in other areas. And as you know, we provide support to the Iraqi security forces, and we'll provide the necessary support to Prime Minister Abadi's plan. So from our perspective, this bit of legislation I don't think fundamentally changes up to the city and breaking into the city, and they're now making good, deliberate headway through the city. I think the key with the clearance of Mosul is that we want it to be done in a safe and a secure manner, and that's exactly what the Iraqi security forces are doing. They're clearing deliberately with absolute regard to the safety of the civilian population, and from that regard they're very firmly on schedule, as Prime Minister Abadi has said today.
Can I follow up briefly on the PMU? Very sectarian conditions that allowed a group like ISIS to rise in the first place. It seems that those PMUs are there to start to shape things in the post-operation period. Is there any concern that this could contribute to sectarian tensions?
Well, look, I think I'll come back to the point that our role is very much to support the government of Iraq. And Prime Minister Abadi is giving clear orders and instructions to the PMU. And I think we should recognise that during the course of the Mosul operation, the PMF forces have abided by those orders. And so for as long as they do that, I'm sure Prime Minister Abadi will be content with that. Whatever orders they are given as part of the operation, we will work closely with the government of Iraq. We'll support the Iraqi security forces in whatever that mission might be, and the PMU may support the Iraqi security forces in turn.
Sir, I don't know your name, I'm sorry.
Sure, that's fine. Wyatt Goolsby with EWTN, the Global Catholic Network. General Jones, you had talked about how you guys are very much aware of protecting civilians. I'm hoping you can touch a little bit more on protecting religious minorities, like Christians, for example. There are many groups of Christians who are afraid to return to their homes, whether it's in Mosul or other parts of Iraq. Is there anything militarily that the coalition is doing specifically to protect religious minorities?
And I'm confident that the government of Iraq takes absolute due account of the requirements of minorities. I know the humanitarian organisations do as well, and I know about those minorities and making sure that there's no, if you like, change to the ethnic balance in the Mosul area. But I think from us in the military, our absolute requirement and the requirement of the Iraqi security forces is to protect all civilians.
Next we'll go to Qasim Al-Ari with Anadolu News Agency.
General Jones, in the initial shape of Mosul battle was apparently leaving the western part of the city open. However, we see that the Shia militia group is now moving toward that route, closing that route, and they have announced even that they have closed that route. Is this part of the coalition plan or Iraqi plan?
The execution of his plan. And as I touched on earlier, the Popular Mobilisation Forces have so far absolutely abided by Prime Minister Abadi's orders, and therefore was it part of the plan for the PMF to go out into the west of the city? Yes, it was. Have they done it at the instruction of the Prime Minister? Yes, I'm confident that they have. So this is very much an Iraqi plan, and we are here to support them.
So how does this movement by the Shia militia help the coalition effort to liberate Mosul?
Well, as I'm not going to second guess the Prime Minister's decision making, but what I can tell you is that from a military perspective, what they're helping to do is to screen the western side of the city and help cut off any potential Daesh who might try and escape out of the city and potentially head all the way west into Syria. So that's the military role that they're fulfilling.
Next we'll go with Jennifer Griffin of Fox News.
General Jones, have you seen any evidence of Iranian ballistic missiles in Iraq or in Syria, either production or placement of?
I started about
I think that's quite a simple one. No, I mean we're very much focused on the counter-Daesh fight, and I'm not going to comment on broader policy issues with regards to Iran. That's very firmly a Washington matter. We're here focused on the counter-Daesh fight. As I've said, we are here supporting the government of Iraq, supporting Prime Minister Abadi to rid Iraq and our partners to rid Syria of the barbaric enemy that is Daesh.
Just to follow up, are you seeing any Iranian forces involved in the fight in Mosul or in Syria?
We're not seeing any Iranians specifically. Again, I don't want to pass comment on that in detail. But as I say, there are a number of actors who are here to support the government of Iraq. The coalition is part of that. I mean, it's well known, and it's no secret that there are strong and entirely reasonable ties between Iran and Iraq, as you'd expect between two neighbours. There's nothing peculiar or suspicious about that.
Okay, next to Corey Dickstein with Stars and Stripes.
Hey, sir. I wanted to see if you could expand a little bit on the bridges that were disabled in Mosul. Can you tell us, were they taken out in airstrikes? And can one infer that most of the V-beds are being made in western Mosul? And do you have any kind of numbers or anything to support that you're seeing less V-bed attacks?
I think I got most of that question, which was about the bridges. The back end of it, you may want to come back to me on. There was something to do with numbers, which I didn't quite catch. So we have hoped to leave the bridges intact for self-evident reasons. They're fundamental to the economy of Mosul after the liberation of the city. But it was becoming increasingly clear to Prime Minister Abadi that the enemy were using them to have free flow between the west and east of the city, to bring in explosive devices to attack the Iraqi security forces, and to move fighters, fresh fighters, in and out of the east and west of the city. And for that reason, the Prime Minister Abadi made the decision that he had little choice but to disable those bridges to prevent the Daesh from doing that. And that is exactly what we have done on his behalf. And forgive me, I didn't quite catch there was a follow-up element doing numbers, which I'm afraid I didn't catch.
You had mentioned that perhaps less V-bit attacks had occurred since you'd taken out the 4 bridges. Do you have any numbers or anything like that to support that? And were the bridges taken out with airstrikes?
Yeah, so 2 things there. Yes, the bridges were disabled through airstrikes, and in numbers, I don't want to be drawn on the sort of detailed tactical numbers. You'll recognise that's really for the Iraqi security forces to put those sort of figures forward. It's their fight, but what we are confident is that we are beginning to see a reduction in the amount of suicide attacks onto the Iraqi security forces, and we assess that to be for a whole number of reasons. One of which is the damage to the bridges that is making it harder for Daesh to flow fighters and ammunition across the river. Secondly, we think because, of course, they don't have an inexhaustible supply of ammunition and explosives anyway. Yeah, thanks. So the coalition position has been consistent, I think, for some time, and that it is that we are in the process of isolating the city of Raqqa. To do that, we are using the Syrian Democratic Forces. They're the forces on the ground. They're the forces capable of isolating the city. They're therefore the forces that give us the fastest and most effective route to rid Raqqa of Daesh. And therefore increase security to the region, but also globally. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing is, of course, we'll continue to work with Turkey and with our other partners, and we will find the most effective force to retake Raqqa. And we are open to options for that. But in terms of isolating the city, that will be the SDF supported by the coalition. But as I say, we will continue dialogue in terms of what force might be able to help with retaking Raqqa in a timely manner.
No final plans on Turkey have been made so far to include them at this point.
No, forgive me. There was something about Turkey. I'm afraid I didn't get the rest of the question.
Okay, I'll repeat. So no plans to include Turkey in the Operation Take Raqqa have been finalized at this point. It's still ongoing discussions.
With Turkey and indeed with other interested parties to decide on what force is best placed to retake Raqqa.
All right, next to Courtney Cuby from NBC News.
Hi, General. Since you're speaking about Turkey anyway, do you have any information about the Turks announced yesterday that a couple of their soldiers are missing in northern Syria? Is that I know that there's the Turkish unilateral operations and then there's the Turkish coalition operations, and I think this one falls in the first category. But do you have any information about that? And were there any other coalition members with these soldiers at the time that they went missing?
So, as I think you'll know from what's been announced publicly, as you say, 2 Turkish soldiers appear to have been taken. That took place, as I understand it, two individuals.
Can you give us a little information about how the coalition is supporting? Is it with air assets, ISR?
You'll forgive me if I don't want to go too far into the detail of that. I think it would be inappropriate to do so. You'll recognise this is a personnel recovery operation. It is therefore inherently sensitive, and I think we wouldn't actually be helping the Turkish very much if we therefore divulged the nature of the assistance we're providing. I think the key is that we work to support Turkey in recovering their 2 individuals.
And then if I could just ask one more on Mosul, as the CTS have been taking some pretty heavy casualties in the east in the past couple of weeks. Are you seeing any sign that their casualties, whether it's injuries or deaths, are becoming unsustainable for the CTS to maintain the push into Mosul, and that there needs to be some sort of like bringing in more Iraqi infantry, or there needs to be some change in how hard the Iraqis are deploying the CTS? I know that this is an Iraqi issue, but as a partner of theirs, are you seeing any signs that there needs to be a change?
Well, look, I think the first thing I'd say is to applaud the courage and the determination and the military skill of the counter-terrorism service who have broken into the eastern side of the city. They've done so, as you indicate, at great cost, but they are great patriots on behalf of Iraq, and they want to contribute to the liberation of Mosul, and we should applaud them for that. They are adjusting their tactics to, as any good military does, in the face of what the enemy is throwing at them. To the detail of your question, do I see any evidence of the counter-terrorism service beginning to, I forget the word used, but run into difficulties? The answer to that is most certainly not. They are very firmly in the fight. They're pressing on. They remain confident. They remain determined. What we must do as a coalition is to help them to advance through the city. We continue to do that by adjusting our tactics, by giving them better and better fire support, but also we can help them by replacing some of their battle-damaged vehicles, and we are most certainly doing that. As to the point you made about should more forces be put into the fight, say that is very much a matter for the government of Iraq, and without wishing to go into too much of the detail here, because it is for them to talk about it, the Iraqi security forces are adjusting their posture, as any good military would, through the course of an operation, to make sure they reinforce success and keep up the momentum against the enemy.
All right, the queue is empty. Anyone else questions? Oh, Louis Martinez from ABC News.
General, you mentioned several times now that the Iraqis are adjusting their tactics, particularly when it comes to VBIDs. Can you get into detail of what were some of the lessons that they've already learned from the battlefield in Mosul?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get the back end of your question, but I got the front end, which was about how the Iraqis are adjusting their tactics. Well, the first thing I'd say is that the Iraqis are working really hard to close up on all their axes to get into the city. As they do that, that will place Daesh under greater pressure and will relieve pressure on the counter-terrorism service, and that must be a good thing. In terms of how they and we are adjusting tactics, I touched on it in my opening statements, in terms of trying to limit the ability of Daesh to bring their suicide vehicles onto the counter-terrorism service. And that is what we've been seeking to do, and part of that is about cratering the routes so that those suicide vehicle-borne IEDs physically can't get down the routes and strike the counter-terrorism service in their flanks.
If I could follow on again, overall on the whole battlescape of the battlefield there in Mosul, what are other lessons that you've learned? And then just a quick follow-up on the bridges. I imagine that these are pinpoint disabling, as you put it, of the bridges, not total destruction of the bridges. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, to that second point first, exactly as described. They have not been destroyed; they have been disabled. We've done that in a very careful manner. Unlike, of course, what Daesh would do if they sought to destroy the bridges, which would leave them inoperable for a considerable period to come, no doubt. So we've done it in a very considered manner. I think the first bit of your question was about the overall situation of Mosul. I'll comment to that. If that wasn't your question, then please do come back to me. I think I would defer to Prime Minister Bardi, not least because it's his plan, but secondly because he's absolutely right when he says the operation is going well. It's on track. It's on broadly on schedule, if you can call it such a thing. The Iraqi security forces have closed up to the city. They've done their hard yards. They've cleared the towns and villages leading up to the city, and then they're now into the hard fight of getting through to the river. And my sense is that the enemy are beginning to struggle. These things do not happen quickly. Anybody who studies a history book will know you do not liberate a heavily defended city the size of Mosul quickly, and patience is therefore needed. Patience is needed by politicians, patience is needed by the military, and I'm confident that with that patience we will slowly squeeze Daesh and the civil population will be liberated and will be released from the scourge of Daesh.
Let's try. Other lessons learned in other parts of the battlefield for Mosul, like Tal Afar or, and the southern approaches. Any other lessons learned?
Well, I think any military is learning all of the time. That's the nature of our profession. And the Iraqi security forces are a hugely professional organisation, as they've demonstrated month after month as they've advanced back through their country. Over their cups of tea, they'll be discussing their day's fighting, and they'll be discussing how they refine their tactics for tomorrow. That's what the best militaries do, and I can guarantee that's what the Iraqi security forces are doing right now.
Okay. Last call. Sir, with that, we will say farewell. Any final words for us, General?
No, just thank you very much for joining. Thanks for listening to the Tame Brit in the coalition. And I guess my last thing I'd say is to return to the strength of the coalition. I think it's very telling. 60+ nations united against a common enemy in the form of Daesh. That is hugely powerful. That coalition will prevail. And we will support our partners in both Syria and in Iraq to ensure that the people are liberated, and critically, that the threat that Daesh poses to all of our homelands, whether you're in Washington, in London, in Paris, in Berlin, or any other capital, remains safe.
Thank you, General. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to hearing from you again soon. Thank you, everybody.